Fantastic. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our final speaker for today. So Professor Angela Ndalianis is Research Professor in Media and Entertainment and Director of the Centre for Transformative Media Technologies at Swinburne University of Technology. Her research focuses on entertainment media, visual effects technologies, the transformative nature of media technologies past and present, and how they impact on embodiment, the senses and perception, and the superhero, horror and science fiction genres. Her publications include Neo-Baroque Aesthetics and Contemporary Entertainment, Science Fiction Experiences, The Horror Sensorium, Media and the Senses, and the edited books The Contemporary Comic Book Superhero, Neo-Baroques from Latin America to the Hollywood Blockbuster, and Fans and Video Games, Histories, Fandom, Archives. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Angela now.
Thank you. Where am I? Is that come through? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. What I'd like to talk about today is the dialogue that's taking place between pandemic media, films and TV shows, for example, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in looking at this, I also want to talk about memes that are being generated that use examples of pandemic media, especially zombie films and TV shows, in order to comment seriously, critically and comically on the pandemic. Now, my interest in this topic actually began earlier this year when I had to get tested for the virus. I'd just returned from Italy and got on the plane only hours after the Italians closed their borders and had to go into the self-isolation when I returned. But I also had a really bad cold and I went off to the Austin hospital to the COVID section to get myself tested. When I walked in to the Austin, the space was just dark and I found myself walking down these dark corridors following the arrows, and the only thing I could think of to compare to the experiences I was having there was The Walking Dead, when you track through and you arrive at that door that says "Do not enter," and yeah, it was just the most bizarre experience, and I'm still trying to, think it through and why I was drawn immediately to this sort of zombie example. The only thing I could turn to make sense of this experience, I guess, was my knowledge of pandemic media. It all seemed so familiar, and yet it wasn't. Since then, I became interested in how the social imaginary that's rehearsed in film, TV and online can be a powerful discursive form that reflects real world social, moral and ethical issues. In broad terms, the social imaginary is how people make sense of their collective social life. Charles Taylor argues that the social imaginary involves the ways that people imagine their social existence. And Gonka states the following: social imaginaries are ways of understanding the social that become social entities themselves, mediating collective life. They're embedded in the habitus of a population or are carried in the modes of address, stories, symbols. They are the means by which individuals understand their identities and their place in the world. Now, the more I followed a lot of the news stories and social media, the more I wanted to understand how, if at all, narrative media dealing with pandemic scenarios have become a significant form of communication during the COVID-19 pandemic. Contagion, the films Contagion, 28 Days Later, World War Z, Train to Busan, I Am Legend, The Walking Dead, and so on and so on, these examples are popular and familiar stories about pandemics that are embedded in the minds of millions of people. The narratives raise questions about what happens to society, its ethics and morality, its political and social structures, its health services, its communities, its scientific communities during pandemics. Whether taking the form of films, social media exchanges or memes, they've taken center stage in mediating collective life on a global scale. Contagion, films like Contagion and 28 Days Later are popular and familiar stories about pandemics that are embedded in and give expression to our social imaginary. Media have become all the more important to people during this period of isolation. People have altered their routines and adopted new ones where media play arguably a more central role compared to previous times. People are accessing media to stay informed, but they're also turning to Netflix, Foxtel, Amazon Prime, and other media platforms to consume narratives. And I became interested in what sort of narratives were starting to dominate. In terms of viewing pandemic media, according to Google Trends, the month of March 2020 recorded sudden spikes in searches for films about pandemic and viral outbreaks. The most watched film has been the 2011 film Contagion, which is about a deadly viral pandemic and has eerie parallels to what we're experiencing today. Contagion, for example, rose from the 270th most watched Warner Brothers film online through various streaming services to the second most watched film in March of this year. Similar spikes have happened with other pandemic films, especially zombie films, which I find really interesting. For example, I Am Legend, the Romero Living Dead films, and Shaun of the Dead, which is the comical version of a zombie invasion. Perhaps they've become an outlet for playing through our fears about the virus in horrifying but safe ways. Okay. Now, news media have also been publishing stories that offer advice about the must-see pandemic films and television series to watch while in lockdown, and stories about the social value that pandemic films serve. And there are even there've even been a number of articles by psychologists who talk about how people who traditionally watch horror films and these pandemic sort of subcategories of many horror films are coping better with the pandemic than others who don't watch these films. And you can see here, I mean, I've just got a few of the news headlines, the movies that will change how you look at Zoom. That's an article about the recently released Host, which is actually quite a good film on that they say is starting to create this sort of subgenre called quarantine horror. And it's basically a group of friends who are Zooming during the pandemic and hold a Ouija board, whatever you'd call that, performance via Zoom, and they unleash bad things that they must then deal with. 10 films about pandemics, contagions, outbreaks you can stream right now. I Am Legend trends after while coronavirus zombie video takes over Twitter. I'll talk about that in a little while. Oh, actually, just leave it there. So what is the benefit? Discussing zombie films, which are one of the most popular and prolific examples of pandemic media, Scrivener explains that the premise of both 28 Days Later and The Walking Dead is what happens to humans individually and to society more broadly during a dangerous viral outbreak. These fictions are, I think, excellent simulations for understanding the dynamics of viral pandemics. Many of these examples do in fact criticize humans and their collective responses more than they criticize the zombies. It's the humans often who are the most horrifying in terms of their actions. And I found that many examples in social media also use images from many of these films and TV shows to provide a critique, especially of humans in the real world. And often the zombie apocalypse comes off as the preferred option in many of these social media exchanges compared to how humans are responding to the coronavirus today. But in terms of social media, I'm starting to sort of find various themes that are starting to emerge. The first is reference to zombies, which is used as a critique of real behaviors in society. For example, on the 16th of April in 2020, the Columbus Dispatch newspaper published a story about protesters in the US demonstrating against restrictions imposed to stop the spread of coronavirus. And the story included the photo on the top left. A photo was taken by the photojournalist Joshua Bickle of protesters crammed against glass doors that looked at into the State House atrium in Columbus. Now, as members of the public across the world recognized, this image actually resembled many classic pandemic films and TV shows, including Shaun of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead. The memes went viral. The photo was compared to similar scenes from zombie films, and what emerged was a powerful dialogue between fictional examples about pandemics and real events being communicated during the COVID pandemic. The memes became an outlet for scathing social commentary about the anti-lockdown Trumpsters in Columbus. And you see here, one of the parallels was at the bottom, you see this photo being compared to Shaun of the Dead. And on the right, I think that's from Dawn of the Dead, with commentary and direct reference being made to how they look like zombies. And again, this anti-maskers behavior was regarded as zombie-like by people who reposted the footage and commented on it.
Oh, Lord. This room is fucking I Am Legend. That bitch talking.
Again, this anti-maskers behavior was regarded as zombie-like by people who, as I said, reposted the footage. Other memes used pandemic films and repurposed them for the coronavirus context, often using comedy to get across their messages. For example, you see here the sequel, supposedly, to I Am Legend, I Am Going to Costco. And having gone for a visit to Costco once, that was enough for me. I kept thinking I was seeing potential zombies everywhere arising. And there's a whole wave of these memes that compare film to reality. These are very popular. There's thousands of them. What I expected my apocalypse outfit to look like versus how it actually looks. And again, the comparison with Max, whereas compared to what really happened, the Big Lebowski in his gym jams at the supermarket. And another one here, how I expected my apocalypse outfit to look, how it actually looks. And again, drawing on South Park for a bit humor there and commentary. So us, the real heroes, tend not to come out too well in most of these examples. There are no heroes, in a sense, is the message that's being delivered. In a sense, it's almost as if humans have become a major letdown. In fact, dissatisfaction was also voiced offline in many of these kinds of images where people posted, I wanted zombies, this virus sucks, we want zombies. So it's like it's not the great sort of experience that you'd find in films. It's actually worse. Oh, bugger. Sorry, the video doesn't seem to be working there. It's basically shoppers in a supermarket fighting each other over rolls of toilet paper. And one of the early memes to go around about how Australians dealt with the announcement of the coronavirus and lockdown was how Australians protect themselves against coronavirus, surround themselves in toilet paper. Pointing to a theme, this idea of, the humans almost being worse, are being worse than the zombies, is a theme really that has its origins in Romero's Living Dead film, Night of the Living Dead of 1968, where the zombies are metaphors for how people live their lives. So the critique is really targeting the human rather than the zombie. Now, in terms of the toilet paper meme, they're everywhere. Oh. And The Walking Dead seems to be the main target here for toilet paper gags. So you've got, Carl, forget the food, get their toilet paper, all the toilet paper. When you take a dump and there's no toilet paper, how about some Daryl toilet paper, and so on and so on. And again here, it's comedy, but at the same time, it's a critique about how humans react have reacted during these times. And even Walking Dead has even been used to explain or comment on the current situation between Victorians and the rest of Australia. Though according to the logic of the subgenre, we're sort of better off because we're the zombies, or pretend zombies, and it's the humans who are the evil evil sort of chaos bringers. And then another theme is the waiting for the virus to evolve into the next phase of COVID. Here you see Baby Yoda waiting for the coronavirus to create zombies, and COVID-19 suddenly transforming into COVID-20 when we become the zombies. Now, amidst all of this, there have been media scares also, scare tactics about outbreaks of the bubonic plague and Ebola, and there was this one that coronavirus victims were behaving like zombies. Examples, I guess, that use, again, play on this idea of reality and fiction, that the fiction is actually coming into our reality. I'll just leave you to ponder on this one. What I've been doing in my research, therefore, is to investigate the role, that important role that narrative performs in society as a vehicle that reflects a shared social imaginary that relates specifically to the current COVID situation. What stories are we telling ourselves across media, and what stories will the new pandemic films be telling us? Now, already there are a few that are in production. The Host that I mentioned earlier, which was recently released, and there's lots of short films being released online that are produced by people who have recorded their own experiences during lockdown. And this one, Corona, Fear is a Virus, is due for release soon. And it's directed by Mustafa Keshvari, who's a Canadian filmmaker. And basically these people are trapped in an elevator, and one of them, the poor Chinese woman, the China flu, is the carrier in here. And there's all sorts of responses. Each individual represents a particular type of response. For example, the guy down low is a neo-Nazi. And then, the drama is around the people in the lift. Mm-hmm. Cornelius Castoriadis argues that the imaginary of the society creates for each historical period its singular way of living, seeing, and making its own existence. I think that these pandemic social media are doing just this. Cultural trauma is the notion that traumatic events don't simply happen and we understand them as traumatic automatically, but that they need to be culturally attributed before we understand them as trauma. Perhaps some of this trauma is being told in these examples, tiny pieces that belong to a jigsaw puzzle that hasn't yet been put together. In other words, representations from social media, films, literature, and so on that have happened already or that will follow will do the work of helping us express and understand our collective trauma. COVID-19, unlike traumatic effects like the war or genocide, is likely to unfold and be processed slowly in stages. Collectively, pandemic media are generating a discursive language that reflects real world social, moral, ethical, and political issues in response to the pandemic.